Good evening. This is the Burnsville Economic Development Commission meeting of July 11th. I'm Gene Grzini. I'm the vice chairman, standing in for Ken Slipka, who is our chairman. We'll start out with the adoption of the agenda. We need a motion for approval to adopt the agenda.
Yes.
Kevin? Second?
Second, yes.
There we go.
Yes.
No discussion. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay. Adoption of the minutes from March 14th, our last meeting. I need a motion on that. Could I get that, please? Sure. Ari, okay, and Kevin, okay. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, open business forum. I believe that's you, Skip?
Mr. Vice Chair, since we have no one in the audience that wishes to address the commission, I think we can move to our next item.
Okay, we'll move forward. Okay, a presentation wait a minute. Oh, we've got the election officers, that's right. Economic Development Commission policy stipulates that each year the commission will elect members to the offices of chair and vice chair. The term of office is for 1 year, and a member may serve 3 terms. Current chair is Ken Slipka as chairman, and myself as vice chairman. And we have served for 1 year. I guess we'll entertain motions from the floor for officers.
Mr. Chair, do you know, is Ken staying on? And does he wish to stay on as
To my
chairman?
knowledge, he is. Yes.
He has not expressed any
Just couldn't make
desire
it.
not to stay
Just
on if
couldn't
you
make
wish
it,
to
no.
re-elect him.
Okay. Well, I would move that we continue with Mr. Slipka as the chairman and Mr. Grzini as the vice chair.
Okay. For second that,
I'll second
it.
any other nominations? Hearing none, vote. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, we have a good friend of mine, Mark Jacobs, who is representing the Workforce Investment Board, who's giving us a presentation on the board.
Good evening, and thank you, Mr. Grzini, for the opportunity to present information about the Workforce Center, Workforce Investment Board, and the related employment programs to you this evening. So every good presentation, I'm sure Kevin could point this out with his expertise, should start with an overview of what we're going to discuss. And so here are the 3 things in front of you, 3 acronyms, WIB, WFC, and LMI. Now explain them, what they mean as we go on. First of all, the Dakota Scott Workforce Investment Board oversees the employment programs and develops the strategies across the 2-county area. It's actually established by federal law. In Minnesota, there are 16 different workforce investment boards. Each one of them, as mandated by law, have more than 51% representation from the private sector. Our leadership of the Dakota Scott Workforce Investment Board includes County Commissioner Will Branning, who represents Apple Valley and Rosemont. Our board chair is Kathy Wyke, who lives in Inver Grove Heights. She's a VP with Stratus Health. She's actually on the National Association of Workforce Boards Board of Directors. And then our vice chair is Corrine Shepard, who's with Blue Cross Blue Shield. As you take a look at our list of board members, we have up to 27 at any given time. I highlighted the ones with Burnsville connections here, and you can see it's a pretty strong connection. Mr. Grzini is on our board and has been for quite some time. Skip Bolton, who's VP of Culture at Proto Labs, actually worked for our own hardware back many years ago, as you remember that employer. Ruthie Batulis lives in Burnsville, but is the president of the Dakota County Regional Chamber of Commerce. Dwayne Lubers from Goodrich. Jennifer Schaubach, who represents the labor category, AFL-CIO, lives in Burnsville. Richard Wagner and Mike Yonda both work at the Burnsville Workforce Center, and Richard also lives in Burnsville. Then our own esteemed Jenny Faulkner is a member of the WIB and also part of the executive committee. And then Gail Morrison, former school board member, is also on the WIB representing Inver Hills Community College. So you can see we really have as you look at these names and others, a dynamic board who really does good work. So the Workforce Investment Board sets the strategy, the overall policies for the employment programs across the two areas. The workforce centers, think of them as essentially the retail site where we're seeing job seekers and serving employers. We have 3 in the 2 counties, one in Burnsville, as you see pictured there. It's on Judicial and 42. Then we also have a site in Shakopee, which is on the wrong side of the racetrack when the wind's from the west, and then also one in West St. Paul. And so the people coming into our workforce centers actually kind of fall into 2 main groups. One is those who fit into eligibility-based programs. And so, for example, the Minnesota Family Investment Program is a program you probably think of as a welfare program. Our goal is to get people off welfare, self-sufficient, and employed into jobs. Our average wage at placement for somebody that's exiting out of that job is about $10.50 an hour. One of the realities of the folks in our program is about 1/3 of them do not have a high school diploma or GED. So you talk about barriers for self-sufficiency, getting people reemployed, that is a significant stumbling block. Dislocated worker programs, those are programs for people who have been laid off from a company from no fault of their own. And so maybe a couple people that have been laid off from a company, or we've also had bigger projects such as Northwest Airlines, where they laid off 1,000 people when they merged with Delta, and so then we worked with those folks. And the services there is we have counselors, employment counselors, who work one-on-one with the individuals. There's money available for training. There's also some support services available, and then many workshops to help with resume writing, interviewing skills, job search over 45, those sorts of things. And you might say, well, why are those programs needed? What we found and what most of the people going through our dislocated worker programs is their skills are dated. So typically, painting with a broad brush here, it's folks who worked at a company for many years. So for example, Smead Manufacturing Company, we worked with employees laid off from there, 50 of them laid off about a year ago. They were in a production environment. Many of them had never used a computer, didn't have email addresses, didn't know how to use the web. And so that was, in that case, one of the first steps we did is just those basic computer skills. In other cases, such as Delta, Northwest, folks had worked, in many cases, 20 plus years at that airline. So they weren't in tune as far as what are the latest job search strategies, using the social networks such as LinkedIn to do their job search. So that's where really a lot of the work our counselors do is getting people up to speed. Then we also work with people with disabilities, we work with veterans, and then the special projects actually relates to those larger layoffs. And I should say, if you have any questions, feel free to pop in at any time. Then we also have services where you don't need to be eligible. Anybody can go in. You may have a job, you may be working part-time, you may not be working at all, but you can come in, use our resource rooms, which are essentially computer labs with the multiple resources for looking for work, help to write resumes, access to job openings. We also have workshops that are open to anyone to attend, resume writing, interviewing skills, dress for success, those sorts of things. And then we also have job fairs, both the large job fair we hold in Eagan each year that typically draws 2,000 to 3,000 people, but also we have mini job fairs which are sector specific. So we may do one with just temp firms to come in, or maybe manufacturing firms or such. And then just a few stats for you. Those resource rooms in those 3 locations in 2011, we had 60,000 visitors. That's not people, it's visitors, because each person comes in on average about 6 times. That stat was actually down from about 97,000 the year before. But interestingly, the trend is back upwards in 2012. Then the eligibility programs, the low-income program, dislocated worker program I talked about, we had about 900 individuals placed. And then we also have youth programs that are really targeted towards disadvantaged youth, and we had 200 youth placed there. I mentioned earlier the wage at placement for folks on the low-income program, about $10.50. You can see it's actually $10.61. But we have the higher wage placement for the dislocated workers, and that's because typically they have higher skills and they're getting a better paid jobs. Our goal, just as a frame of reference, is when somebody's laid off, our goal is to try to get them at a job paying at 85% or more of what they were making before. And we have been achieving that, but that's kind of our baseline. We have a second set of consumers we're interested in, and that's employers. And during the recession, we were not getting much demand from employers for our services to help find people. We have a variety of things here. You can see it from the hiring and training aspect, a couple things we do. I want to kind of cite a couple local examples along these lines. One is Costco. When they moved into Burnsville back, I believe it was about 2 years ago, while they're building the space, and they need to hire people, they didn't have room to do it. So they actually used our Burnsville Workforce Center to do those interviews, and over a course of a couple months, interviewed like 3,000 people and then hired a couple hundred with that. Another example, which Skip was instrumental on, is from the training standpoint. And so companies have training needs. Some of it is they want to hire skilled people, but also train their existing employees. Skip was aware of a company in town, Frontier, that was looking at either expanding here or moving the jobs out. Was looking at if they brought the jobs here, how could those folks be trained? Skip made the connection with Dakota County Technical College. They put together a job skills partnership, which was one of the pieces of the puzzle for helping that company not only stay but to grow. So just kind of an example where those things can work.
Mark?
Yes.
Excuse me, for a gentleman at the table here, I've been using Minnesota Job Bank quite a bit in the last year. It is fantastic. I mean, we're getting some good people there. We're getting a lot of them, and we've hired a bunch of them.
Good.
But I'm very happy with it. I'm on the board, obviously, and so I'm happy to see that it is working very well. So if you're looking to hire someone, give them a shot.
Yeah, thank you. And along that vein, to do so from both the employer and job seeker standpoint, it's free. So from an employer, you can post jobs for free, but if you don't want to post a job and just look at resumes, put in some keywords, you can do that. And from a job seeker standpoint, you can either post your resume, but you can also just kind of scan and see what jobs are out there as well. Then we also have business service specialists that if your company's got some really more in-depth needs, they'll work with you one-on-one. Some more information from employers. We're going to actually hit some labor market information here in a little bit. And then we've also put quite a bit together as far as resources for entrepreneurs, have held workshops. And one we held last year in conjunction with all the chambers had more than 40 people who were interested in starting a business. In the subsequent survey, we found out many of them already had. They were doing it part-time, kind of on the side, on that business startup. And their number one need, and I think many of us on the planning side thought would be access to capital, because that's certainly something we hear a lot about. But in the post-event survey, they said their number one need was help with marketing. And so both from a kind of the traditional means, but also the social media side. So that was pretty interesting, and we're connecting people to those sorts of resources. LMI, labor market information. The fine folks at the Department of Employment and Economic Development, specifically Rachel Vilsack, pulled together some data for you, which I'm using liberally here. We'll start with the state, then work down to the county, and then to the city. So here in the May data, you can see that the jobs were cut a little bit, but over the year there's growth, and actually, the trends from pre-recession, recession, the jobs and the number of employers dropped dramatically, but then things started building back up. You can see where the growth is in both education and health services, and that trend's consistent at the county and city levels as well. And then some pickup, which I think would surprise some folks, but in the construction area. Unemployment rate is at 5.6. We'll hit that a little bit more with some more specific data. Minnesota labor force participation rate is at a low. Now, 71.1% as opposed to I have it right. The national rate at 63%. Why would that go down? And a couple reasons. One is people who are unemployed not looking anymore. We also, the folks who are older folks who are deciding they're not going to work anymore, retire, them dropping out, and plus, as you look, if you ever seen the state demographer's presentation, we have fewer young people coming into the equation and more older people retiring, and so there's a mismatch that way. So ultimately, that drops the labor force participation rate. Dakota County, you can see about the 9,500 private firms. That number was over 10,000 prior to the recession. A pretty good balance as far as across these main sectors. And a year ago, the data gurus at Deed told us that actually Dakota County was number one for having the most diverse economy amongst businesses. So it's not so top heavy with one particular sector such as manufacturing or retail. And you can see manufacturing and healthcare sectors about a quarter of the overall employment. Here's a little bit of info about Burnsville. You can see back to 2000 to 2011. Not surprisingly, there was growth until the recession. 2010's right in the midst of it, where you saw the drop. But things, as you can see in 2011, continuing to grow. I think this coincides a little bit with skipping hired as far as that growth. But also just the increase due to market conditions, overall, the average weekly wage increases as well. And then this is just a little bit of breakdown by the largest employing sectors. 20% in Burnsville for retail is a little bit higher than the county, which is, I believe, about 14%. And then healthcare is about consistent with the 12%, is 12% countywide, so it's a little bit stronger in Burnsville than in the rest of the county. Manufacturing is the same. And then the accommodation and food service is about the same as well. And construction has actually been a little bit of a yo-yo economically, and Gene could certainly talk about that better than I. But as far as how it really dipped with the recession, and now we're seeing things climb back up a bit on that. And then you can see the growth areas as far as manufacturing, the healthcare, and social assistance. A lot of people feel that the real answer on the healthcare growth, rate of growth, is going to depend on ultimately what the Supreme Court's decision was, but then what would happen in the elections to really put some certainty to that whole piece. Unemployment, UI. So the I in unemployment stands for insurance. It's unemployment insurance. So typically Minnesota does do better than the U.S. as a whole, and this is kind of a trend chart from 2000 to present. And actually you can see it's a significant gap right now on the positive side for Minnesota. One of the lessons learned for unemployment, this is one of the more probably misunderstood statistics that's out there, because it's actually done based on a survey across the country. It's not really based on any hard data as far as how many claimants are there, how many have gone off. It's actually this survey. So that's a challenge, and where you can see some fluctuations when it's almost counterintuitive sometimes. It's also those rates do not reflect people who are no longer looking, people who are working part-time, nor the ones with temporary barriers such as transportation or child care issues. So that's what makes it a really difficult rate to have a ton of confidence in. It's the best one anybody uses. But for example, in the midst of the recession, you could say, well, how does the unemployment rate really feel? When it was 7% at the time, you'd say, it can't felt like double when the people you're talking with and people you're working with, realizing a lot of folks have been unemployed, their unemployment benefits have been exhausted. Now it's a much lower threshold. People are doing better in general. There's still a lot of people looking, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot better scenario than 2 years ago, for example. The other thing this doesn't measure, and had a question about this the other day, is the underemployed. So, for example, we may have been working with somebody, let's say they worked at Delta, they really needed to work, unemployment wasn't enough. They may have taken a job at Home Depot, for example. So they're working, they're probably not making the money they were, but it doesn't reflect in the data, in the real available consumer spending. Local unemployment rates, traditionally Dakota and Scott counties both do much better than the state rates. I think part of that is that diversity of the business base, and also a very skilled workforce across the two counties. Very educated workforce is key. And then Burnsville, and these numbers are even more apt to vary, is at 4.9 as well. This last bullet item, the 3 job seekers to 1 job opening rate. Any ideas how high that number actually was about 2 years ago?
You probably told me, but I don't recall.
You're exempt from guessing because inside knowledge. It's actually 8.3. So you can see there's been a dramatic improvement just in that measure. And then here's some historical rates, and you think back to 2000 when the dot-com business was really popping and everything was going pretty well. To see that the rates were actually down to 2.2 in Minnesota, some would say that full employment is whenever you're at 4% or lower. So that's a case where actually, if you remember that ratio that was 3 to 1, that was almost turned around, where there's like one job seeker for every 2 jobs. You might remember the Burger Kings and the McDonald's were offering hiring bonuses. You know, so just how quickly the economy can change. This just kind of shows the graph, and actually between the job openings and the job seekers, and you can see how it flipped from 2000, as I just talked about, to where it is now, kind of inverse. And then, but where are the jobs? So this one's an interesting slide in that you'll see many of the jobs listed with the job openings now are very low paying, but you're seeing some things pick up. And for example, registered nurses for a while had not been on this list. And also seeing some things pick up in IT. You know, Thomson Reuters, clearly a good example of that, a company with some significant hiring needs right now, but really specialized. And then by 2020, there's these are the projections from Deed. Really a key thing here is just how important an education will be. And that's going to be one of our ongoing challenges, not only like that adult basic education, the high school diploma, the GED, that stepping stone, but also these technical skills. There's some argument whether a 4-year degree is needed or not, based on the cost of education. But you know, so many of the jobs, like we'll see in the next slide, haven't been created yet. And so really giving people that building block to be skilled to go on to what's not yet known. And this just shows where that projected growth is. Really health services, well, education and health services are combined here. It's really health services driving this. And then here's what they're projecting to add the most jobs. To 2012, as you can see, so many are healthcare related. Many of them are low income related, but also, don't pay a lot. You know, when you look at fast food workers, childcare workers, nursing aides, but yet others very specialized and highly paid. And so that's the outlook for to 2020, thanks to Deed. This last slide, just want some of the things we're seeing, I guess, that's not necessarily in the data, but a lot of it you're reading about, and is, the shortages in some areas. It alluded to what Thomson Reuters is seeing, but we're also seeing it in manufacturing a lot in the press about the shortage of machinists, for example. Part of the challenge there is the colleges, Dakota County Technical College, for example, had a machining program. The market dried up. They didn't have any students, so they got rid of the equipment. Well, now that the market's back, they don't have the equipment there to train folks, and many other two-year schools did the same thing. So that really has made that problem worse as manufacturing has rebounded. Getting that skilled workforce is a significant challenge. Another area is just this whole information technology area has really kicked in the gear. A lot of jobs that were overseas have been outsourced. They're coming back. And so as companies try to ramp up there, part of that then comes to the skills gap. You know, so part of the challenge is a lot of the companies are looking for 4-year degrees, students with 4-year degrees in the IT area. Well, that doesn't happen overnight. You know, Goodrich down the road here, you know, with their need for a variety of positions, including engineers, same sort of challenge. And so that really leads into that school business connections really coming back to the forefront as an important need. How can employers work with schools with career awareness components? We're also seeing it from the schools. Skip and I and Darren met with the Burnsville High School principal, something they're very interested in. How can they connect companies with the STEM careers and a STEM curriculum? So things are kicking in there, and I think, yes, Rich?
What, I think we all saw this article about a small town in Pennsylvania, and the mayor, I think he took everybody back to minimum wage, and that's a mess. Mm-hmm. And he thought there was like $5,000 left in the kitty. What's going to happen to that situation, and what can we do to definitely affect? Excuse me, I get nervous. Sorry, but Can you comment about that? Is there something that scares me?
It sounds like a Jenny question, actually.
Mr. Vice Chair, if I could.
Surely.
I only briefly caught the article that Commissioner Vanderlyn is referring to, but to give you an example, in Burnsville, we start on our budget operations in June, and we've already done one presentation to council. Council is always, I think the comment the other night was, staff has always done a good job of being lean on the budget. We're going to ask staff to take a good hard look at this budget and stay lean. So we monitor very closely our financial situation. Burnsville consistently is one of the highest rated cities in the state of Minnesota for the way in which we deal with our finances. So the likelihood of any of our staff being reduced to minimum wage because of financial issues is virtually nil.
Sure.
And I would say that, to my knowledge, most of the cities around us are as equally sound and follow equally strong processes to make sure that they stay financially sound.
Anything to add, Jenny?
No, I concur with Skip. I think this may have even come up at the work session last night as an example, and I think the comment was made and the lawsuit was ensued the next day. So to be determined on that, but rest assured that we are in sound financial condition, as Skip said, with our budget process and stuff. So the risk of that happening is very, very minute here.
Thank you.
Just a couple last things. Actually, the retirements piece and shortages fits together. I talked earlier about how the number of young people coming in the workforce is declining relative to the number of people who are able to retire. And so from a demographic standpoint, it does look like a workforce shortages. The unknown, of course, is how does the economy change? How does insourcing, outsourcing, how does that work? How does technology change from productivity standpoint? So there's many variables, but from a pure demographic standpoint, we're on the way to workforce shortages. Then the last thing I would just say that's a real encouraging change from a year ago is just how much business activity has picked up. You know, what you see here in Burnsville and the great work that's happened here, we're seeing it in many cities across the two counties that people like Skip and Jenny and their counterparts who weren't getting calls a couple years ago, now things are bubbling and there's actually activity. So that's a good sign on many fronts. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for serving on a commission like this. This is important work, so thank you.
Excellent presentation, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Can I ask a question? I just have a quick question. You know, when I was in grad school, this is 15 years ago now, it was always taught that 4% is full unemployment, and this was in the roaring 90s when guys my age were switching jobs every month.
Yeah.
And with the efficiencies and the new economy, is the full, what is your opinion of the full employment? 7%, 7.5%? Because we're so efficient now that we can subsidize more unemployed, and we've got the demographics taking place that are going to shift more. The participation rate's going to be lower than it has been in the past because of demographics. What is full employment or full?
Yeah.
I mean, is 7% a better number now?
I would think maybe we'd go lower.
Okay.
Actually, because they're less labor force, more opportunities.
But there's less people that are skilled for that, those automative jobs. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I just don't know if there's, your organizations like yours, or even what they're teaching in the schools now, what full employment would be.
Right. Yeah. Good question. I don't know the answer. And one of the other wild cards there, and one of the things we look at is from a labor supply standpoint, as things tighten up, is looking at underserved populations. We're looking in some cases where people are coming out of the correction system, getting them reemployed. You have an excellent return on investment when you're successful there, but it's successes aren't easy.
Well, that's one of the few areas that government can play a role. And you see it in North Dakota right now with the oil rigs, and you're getting people to move out there, and you're getting them to be transported into temporary housing. And I think that's one of the roles that government can be efficiently productive in, and finding the supply versus the demand and the employment market. And that's kind of what you're doing.
Yep,
to some
absolutely.
degree.
So this economy, you can have more success with that. 2 years ago, we're having trouble getting dislocated workers placed, much less somebody with a little bit more challenging background.
Right.
Anything else?
Sure, quick question. Mark, relating to, you're talking about the skills gap and public-private partnerships, companies partnering with colleges. Do you see more of that happening to kind of close that skills gap here in Minnesota?
Yeah, really do. A couple things along that front. One is actually you may have read where the customized training programs with Dakota County Technical College and Inver Hills Community Colleges are combined now, so they can work together really in a singular approach and working with area companies on what their training needs are, whether it's for credit or customized. That's a big deal. It's a very big deal and kind of an earth mover. Along that vein, the Workforce Investment Board, along with the chambers and the University of Minnesota and the two colleges, DCTC and Inver Hills, we have a survey out right now asking what employers' training needs are. In parts, is like, okay, is the right curriculum there? But if not, what's it need to be? To hit some of those specific needs. So we're right in the midst of that, and we'll have wrapped up probably by August 1 for some really good data.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Jenny?
Mr. Chair, if I can just add, Commissioners, we asked Mr. Jacobs to come and speak to you tonight because of the link to economic development. It may have been something you weren't familiar with, so I hope you understand the linkage. Skip and I work with the WIB. When we have a new business come to town, like he mentioned with Costco, they're going to need to hire people. How can we get local residents and people in the county hired so we make those connections? We have existing businesses that may leave or have training needs. So there's a nice link to the WIB with that. The WIB also provides training grants to businesses. So if there's something that we can do to help an existing business, the WIB is a partner of us. And as you've heard, unfortunately, when a business leaves, they're there to help too at that stage. So I just wanted you to know there's a linkage. You may not always see it, may not come before you, but it's a unique thing that we have in Burn Zone. We're really about information sharing to help the businesses along the way.
And obviously Walmart is a part of the discussion as they open their store.
Not yet. But,
Okay. I was gonna- I mean,
what we see too along that front is, like, for example, we recently worked with Target in Inver Grove Heights. That's going to open here at the end of July. The big companies have a really streamlined system in place, and things pop pretty quickly, and they have a good program. So a lot of times we're working with smaller companies on those sorts of needs.
Thank you very much.
Yep,
Mark.
thank
Great
you.
presentation, very good. There is a definite linkage, no question about it. Okay, our next presenter is Mr. Ninehouse. He's going to give us on the reader board duration timing. Excuse me, before I start, Skip, is it possible we could get a copy of your presentation, Mark?
I will actually, if you want, Mr. Chair, I will email a copy,
Please.
if you're okay with it, to everyone tomorrow morning. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioners. We're going to discuss one of your favorite topics, signs. Just a little quick history. As you may recall from last year's discussion, back in 2009, the duration of the timing on reader boards was reduced from 8 hours to 60 seconds. And then last year, we had about a 6-month time frame in which you had many meetings to discuss our whole sign ordinance. And last year, both this commission and the Planning Commission recommended that we remain at 60 seconds. When the ordinance amendments got to council took another look at it, and council decided that they would reduce the timing on the reader boards to 30 seconds with a 1-year review to see what will be the impact of that reduction. That year has now passed, and we're back with the Economic Development Commission to kind of do a quick little review. A couple of things in your background that we think might help frame your discussion on what we should do. As you all know, back in April and May, we did a business survey. One of the questions that's asked on the business survey is, what could Burnsville do to be a better place for business? We did have 21% of the respondents say allow signs. That's a very broad topic. It obviously, we allow signs, so that's a very broad response. Over 50% said, actually, there's nothing we can do. We're perfect, or at least they thought we were perfect. But obviously, the need for signage is always going to be there. We also, at the same time, did a survey of our residents. And one of the questions they were asked is, what is your number one traffic concern? 42% of our residents said distracted driving was their number one concern. Now, distracted driving covers a broad base. That's playing with your radio, playing with your cell phone,
Dog in your
reading,
lap.
eating your McDonald's burger, or doing all kinds of things. But obviously, it's interesting that our residents came out and said, we're getting concerned about the distracted driving. In talking with our police department, in the last year since we changed the timing on the reader boards, we cannot really say that we know of an accident that was directly attributable to that change. That does not mean that there may not have been some linkage there. It's just there are so many factors in what may cause an accident. We can't say that there was one or two, or this accident or whatever was directly the result of that of a sign changing faster. I can tell you that when we went from 8 hours to 60 seconds, we had a number of permits to do reader boards. We have not really seen that similar type increase with a reduction from 60 seconds to 30 seconds. Obviously, when you make a reduction from 8 hours to 60 seconds, it makes it a little more palatable to have a reader board. The interesting thing is, when talking with our planners, most of the people that have been talking to them about reader boards actually have no idea what is the timing duration that we have. That's one of the questions they ask. How often can my sign change? It appears the request and the information that we're asked regarding reader boards now is more based on the desire to have that technology. And then when they're deciding then what they want that technology, then they start investigating how much will it cost me to buy a sign, what type of process do I need to go through with the city, and oh, by the way, how often can my message change? So we're not seeing as much how quickly the message can change to be the driving factor that it was when we went from 8 hours to 60 seconds. Not surprisingly, when you go from 8 hours to 60 seconds, that's a tremendous change. When staff looked at this in preparing your background, we note that obviously our police department always has a concern about anything that would increase distractions while you're driving. We noted our residents' concern about traffic distractions and how much they're worried about it. But we also have to look at the fact that we really can't say accidents increased because we changed from 60 seconds to 30 seconds. So staff's recommendation to the Economic Development Commission is that you recommend to council that they just adopt the 30-second timing and keep it as is. Staff would certainly stand for questions, and obviously you do not have to accept our recommendation. You can make whatever recommendation you prefer.
Comments?
I have a question. Is there any restrictions on the amount of verbiage on the signs? Can it be any length? I would think that would be a more distraction than maybe a constant change.
The Commissioner John, the limit on the verbiage would be basically the amount of verbiage that you can get on the reader board, and then it can only change 30 seconds. So if you were going to roll through a sentence, it could still only change 30 seconds. So that the chances of someone seeing your whole sentence declines. You are correct. Studies do show that if the message is going from one turnover to the next turnover, it is more distractive because you read half of the sentence and then you continue to focus on the sign, waiting for the next half of the sentence to come up. As I drive around Burnsville, I actually don't see a message that scrolls from one to the other over 30 seconds. They're pretty much limited to Pepsi for $3 a 12-pack or whatever that the sign might say. But you are correct, that roll from one part of the message to the other is actually an increase in distraction.
Anything else? Do we have a recommendation?
I would recommend to keep the existing 30-second duration in place.
Is that a motion?
That is a motion.
Second? Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we can Skip, you're still on deck.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Your updates, in your packet, we supplied you with the activity related to our STEM initiative for the months of March and April and May and June. The reason for the two is obviously we did not have our meeting back in April. If there's any questions regarding those activity reports, I'd certainly be happy to answer those questions. We also, since we're kind of at the mid-year point, thought it would be interesting to kind of give you an update on where we are versus your work plan, and I'm happy to report, especially with 2 more things on the agenda tonight, that you have actually made phenomenal progress against your work plan. We only really have 1 item left on the work plan that we need to cover throughout the balance of the year. The only thing I would bring to your attention on your work plan is, and I believe we put this into your work plan mid-year last year and carried it over to this year, and that is that commissioners would attend at least 4 events throughout the course of the year. And we typically focused on ribbon cuttings and open houses, although we have added other things. We are kind of in sync. Every commissioner has attended something in the first 6 months. We'll probably be pretty close to everybody attending 3 or 4, but I would just bring that to your attention. One of the things when I was reviewing this material that I noted is that the majority of our ribbon cuttings and open houses have either occurred mid-morning, early afternoon, kind of right at the end of the day at maybe 4:30. So we recognize that for those of you, which is most of you, who work outside the city of Burnsville, attending those types of events could be very tough. And as obviously as volunteers, we're not expecting you to take 3 hours vacation to attend a ribbon cutting. But it may be just something that we want to just keep in the back of our minds when we work on next year's work plan. Is that something that we want to continue on there? Do we want to adjust it, tweak it, whatever? Other than that, you have made phenomenal progress on your work plan. And again, if you have any questions about where we're at on the work plan, I would be happy to answer those questions also.
And Skip, if I may add, tomorrow is the Ale House ribbon cutting for a happy hour, so that's the most convincing one to attend. The chamber is going to be a part of that, so I'll be out there tomorrow.
Commissioner Andrzejewski, that's a good idea.
And then Mr. Vice
Anybody
Chair.
that comes a beer, how's that?
One thing that was not in your packet on updates because it just occurred last night, and I think it's actually very, very good news. Staff made a presentation at the work session last night regarding soil remediation efforts in the MRQ. And we've focused on the Lady Bird DuPont area of the MRQ. As you well know, the quarry and the landfill are pretty well out there about 20 years before they are exhausted. Council has given direction to staff to come back with a plan to be more flexible on the interim uses that are allowed in the MRQ, which will allow some of our landowners to lease some land out to some folks for a while. And then also have a plan in which we would somewhat assist those landowners in their soil remediation efforts. Our assistance will probably be around purchasing some easements where we can store, for example, dirt from the 13 and 5 project in a couple of years and use that clean dirt to replace the peat and things that are in the MRQ. We also have one landowner, the Dworsky family, which is the Park Chrysler Jeep, that is very interested in doing soil remediation on their property for the purposes of redevelopment. We have not really discussed what that redevelopment at this point will be. We will probably in about 2 months go back to council with what we think will be a plan we can move forward. Between now and then, staff will be working on the plan. We've also connected with the landowners again down there. We're going to go back to them with the plan and get some feedback from them. We believe that while it was quite a jolt to realize that the 2 main drivers, the landfill and the quarry, were not going to change for 20 years, and then when we did our soil feasibility study and found out that in most cases the cost to remediate the soil on a property was anywhere from 2 to 3 times the value of the property, it was quite a jolt. And for a while there we were thinking, well, nothing's going to happen. Based on input from those landowners as we had discussions and based on staff discussions, we think we can put together a plan that will incrementally move us along over a 15-year period of time to redevelopment in the area. I have jokingly said around City Hall that they will be flying in people from all over the world in a few years to look at this plan and say, how did this city clean up this mess without spending any money? So we think that's very, very good news, and we will keep you in the loop as we move through with the plan. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Okay. The updates on the Burnville STEM Alliance.
They were in your background. If you have questions, I would be happy to answer those questions.
And the 2012 work plan, or I guess you kind of covered that already.
Covered
Is there anything else?
And unless commission has any questions.
Move for adjournment?
I'll move.
And Harry?
I will second it, yes.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Great.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thanks, Skip.
you.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mark.